Good afternoon to you. When the big issue started in 1991, there was 501 organizations in London alone that were there for the relief and support of homeless people. So in 1991, there were 501 homeless organizations. And you were drawn to London because most of the people who actually were homeless didn't come from London. They came from everywhere else. So something happened up in the north of Scotland. A child was abused, sexually abused, for instance, while in the local authority care. And they had a grim life, and then they maybe ended up in the army, or they ended up in prison, and then they ended up in the streets, and they ended up with us, or they ended up in London. So London was this great magnet that attracted people who were having tremendously poor lives and were using drink and drugs in order to medicate themselves, in order to mask the worst problems that came from the lives that they were living. And these 501 organizations would give you everything. A place to watch the television, a place to have a shower, a place to eat. Even they gave you condoms. They handed out condoms. When I was at one of these places and I said to them, if you're handing out the condoms, when do the women arrive? And they threw me out. Because how do you think homeless people have sex in the streets? They don't. And that's one of the problems. 501 organizations doing everything imaginable for a homeless person other than giving them the chance of making their own money. So you had thousands of people working for the benefit of homeless people. Thousands of people getting money from the government, getting money from charities, getting money from rich people, from movie stars. Everybody was at it. And yet, nobody was giving the homeless social mobility. And we all know, do we not, that if any one of us ever wants to make our way in life, we're going to have to stop taking money from mummy and daddy. We're going to have to grow up. We're going to have to stop saying, please. We're going to have to stop relying on the generosity of our own families in order to grow up. And yet the poor, they never get the chance to grow up because, as in London, there were 501 homeless organizations holding them down and making sure that they were there to receive the gifts. And as I'm sure you all read the Bible, in the Bible it says, "'Tis better to give than to receive." And we know why that is. Because the people who give have cleaner underwear than the people who receive. The people who receive have a poorer life than the person who gives. So there was this system, this wonderful, magnificent system in 1991. And the system was, you could not give the homeless the opportunity of getting out of homelessness. All you could do was make them comfortable while they were there. And actually, the more you made them comfortable, the longer you extended the life of their poverty. You get that? Simple, innit? Absolutely simple. Now, I came along and I did something very dumb. I went before them and said, there is a paper in America called Street News, which a friend of mine bought a copy of. And my friend met this guy who'd come out of prison and didn't want to go back into prison again and didn't want to get into more trouble again. So the guy became an entrepreneur. and he sold papers on the streets so that he didn't have to go robbing and getting back into trouble. And my friend, a guy called Gordon Roddick, who with his wife, Anita Roddick, started the Body Shop. I don't know if you know the Body Shop over here, but it's all over the world. Gordon Roddick brought the idea to England and asked me to do it. And it was a simple thing. Instead of giving money to beggars, instead of giving handouts to beggars, you said to them, I tell you what, we're going to get you working. We're going to get you working and we're going to get you earning. And that was weird. Anyway, the 501 homeless organizations, they got hold of Johnny Bird and they said to me, you've never worked for Crisis, you've never worked for Centrepoint, you've never worked for all these wonderful sounding organizations. You don't have a record in homelessness. And you're coming along and you're going to give homeless people the opportunity of making money. And I said, you're right. I said, all right then, tell me two things. Am I shouting too loud? Because I'm a terrible. I used to be a Marxist, Leninist, Engelist, Trotskyist, and I used to be always shouting, you know, terrible. I'm from the old days. Before microphones. Anyway, and I asked them two questions. The first question I said, you don't want them to earn money because they'll spend it badly. And they said, yes. I said, all right then. What are they doing at the moment? Well, they're doing that, aren't they? I said, all right, so where are they getting the money? Well, they're robbing. They're selling their bodies. Sorry about that. You can tell I wouldn't get much. And they're begging. So they're doing all sorts of things to get the money because they're doing that anyway. And I said, wouldn't it be good if we moved the trajectory of their lives, a lovely word, instead of bobbing along, wouldn't it if you change the trajectory slightly and you move them in a different direction? Because what you do is you convert them into earning their own money so that if they're doing that or that, they're not hitting this poor young lady to feed their habits. Now, when you go to America and you go, and I worked in Hollywood in that area, you never get these actors, they don't go out murdering people to get something to put up their nose, they ring their dealer. Why can't we extend to the poor the right that they don't have to murder and rob and maim and end up in prison in order to feed their habits? Capiche? That's the entrepreneur in me. The other thing, of course, was I said, all right then, can I ask you another question? I've never worked in homelessness. I'm a 45-year-old git. That was 20 years ago. So you can work out how old I am now. I'm a 45-year-old git. I've never worked in homelessness. I've never worked in charities. I loathe charity. Doesn't go down very well to charities. But I might be slightly different. Now, wouldn't it be nice to try an experiment? Wouldn't it be nice to try an experiment where somebody who once was a part of the problem becomes involved in a part of the solution? Wouldn't it be nice if someone who had actually suffered from homelessness, who had been a drunk in the street, who had been a robber, who'd been in the prison system, who'd been a rough sleeper, who'd been a piece of social scum, wouldn't it be wonderful if we took that person and that person, me, could then lead other people out of the sticky stuff. Sticky stuff is a nice way of saying another word which isn't so nice. Leading them out of the sticky stuff so that they could have a life. And they went, oh, wow. And they left me alone. Because I would have crucified them. I would have shown them that there comes a time in entrepreneurism that we have to start looking at the old problems in a new way. And that's why your slide is very misleading. I don't know what this man does for a living, but he should be very ashamed of himself with that slide. And I would suggest that he tries another job. Sorry, my phone's about to go off, so can you press it or something? It's an iPhone, and I just, yeah, I'm all right with one on the wall. Anyway, 1991. The chickens come home to roost. Since 1991, I haven't just started a street paper. I have started a whole series of businesses all over the world and helped to start papers. I think you've got one in Zurich, which is a street paper, which grew out of the movement that we started. In some countries it works incredibly well. In other countries it doesn't work so well. And in other countries it just barely exists. But what it does is it's a simple principle. And that is that people who are in poverty need more than anything an exit out of poverty. And one thing they don't need is they don't need to be controlled by the welfare system, by the benefit system. And that actually there is this big conspiracy, in my opinion, because there's a lot of people who do well out of poverty. I'm writing a book at the moment called The Necessity of Poverty. I've got an iPad. I've got a beautiful iPad. And I saw Steve Jobs, the late lamented Steve Jobs, announce the iPad 4 or 5 years ago. And I ran out and got one because I write all the time. I've got an illness. I have to write 10,000 words a day. And I've got an iPad. And when they launched the iPad, Mr. Jobs talked about everything. The look of it, the technology and all that. One element he left out. One of the deciding elements was poverty. Because the thing is that if Mr. Steve Jobs had taken the iPad and had gone down the road to anywhere in the United States, the contiguous United States, or into South America, or into parts of the world, into Europe to build it, we'd be paying $3,000 or $4,000 for an iPad. And so Apple would be a very small company. But Apple's a very big company because they went a long way away from the marketplace where they could get somebody to do it for $50 a month. So the biggest element, the largest element, in my opinion, or the most decisive element, aside from the invention itself, is poverty. And we have to try and realize, especially in these very, very difficult times that we live in, how we rely tremendously on the poor. And it's about time we got off their backs and freed them up. And what I started in 1991 was a kind of mini revolution, because what I started to do was to try and get the homeless and the poor to be involved in their own solution, in moving away from poverty, rather than relying on the generosity of the state, who only puts nails into the hands of the poor so that the poor remain forever. That sounds fantastic, because what we need to do is bring the entrepreneurial into the academic. We need to bring them into the NGO. We need to learn how to think outside the box. Do you know why? I'll tell you why. Because only by thinking outside of the box can we then return to the box and think within the box. That's the next stage. Mr. David Cameron, who is the Prime Minister of England, occasionally calls me to see him. I'm a very popular man with government, and the reason they love me is because they know it's better. There's one thing that LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was the Prime Minister of England, of America, the President of America, he was asked why he had somebody in the tent, in the cabinet, and he said, it's better that the man is in the tent pissing out than out the tent pissing in. And that's why they're nice to me, because I could be a right terror. I can be a right pain. Anyway, so these people call me. They call me and they ask me to come and have dinner with them, and they say, well, you know, what can we do? And I keep telling them that the real entrepreneurial thing has got to be when we make entrepreneurism mainstream, when it is taught at the university and is encouraged at the university, and every one of the bodies of government have to have entrepreneurs in them, and that we have to teach entrepreneurism, because we can't leave it to mad people like me who are the first, second or third generation. People like me, I don't know if you know Anita Roddick, who started the Body Shop, who also did an enormous amount of work for fair trade and all that, and did all sorts of things, and then died 5 years ago. But her and I were a pair of mad people. I knew her very well. We couldn't stand the sight of each other because we were very similar. We were mad. And what we've got to do is we've got to move away from these kind of theatrical entrepreneurs towards a kind of everyday entrepreneurism. So you go into the college, you go into the university, you go into the NGO, and you change it, not because there's some mad person keeping you entertained. Anyway, one of the reasons that Cameron asked me is because he wants me to give him some problems. He hasn't got enough problems. So I give him the problem, and I always say the only reason of thinking outside of the box is so that we can then go back and think inside the box. And I'm now going to start telling you my story. I never know how long I've got, so you'll have to remind me. I'm very bad timekeeper. I can talk for 3 or 4 hours. If I've got a bottle of water, I'm off. And you will probably be going to bed at about 2 in the morning. 10 more minutes. You're joking. I haven't even started. Can I tell you a joke? One joke. There's a man rushes into a shop. You might not understand this, actually. There's a man rushing into a shop, and he says, where's the camouflage jackets? And the manager says, they're good, aren't they? That's the end of the jokes. The reason I go and talk to people like Cameron is because I am fascinated by the prison system. And I've actually asked Mr. Cameron to give me a prison. And the reason for that is because I come from a London Irish scumbag background. I was born into a horrible family. They were very, very poor, and they were very racist. They didn't like blacks, they didn't like Jews, they didn't like Indians, they didn't even like Swiss people. They liked your cheese, and that was about it. And it was, not only were they poor, they made themselves poorer by the thoughts that they put into their heads. the fact that they smoked too much and they drank too much and they fought too much. My father was an incredibly violent man. I was 18 and I'd come out of prison because I'd been in prison, and that's where I got educated. And when I came out of prison at the age of 18, I grabbed hold of my father and I gave him a few kicks in the head because he was trying to beat my mother up, and I said, "Don't you touch my mother again." And he never touched her. But those are the kind of people I came from. And not only were they poor, living in slums, they made life even more evil. And they had this evil thinking that they poured into their children's heads. So ever since I've been a child, I've been fascinated by poverty. Homeless at 5, into a Catholic orphanage at the age of 7, where the nuns spent the whole time telling us that there were hard-working Irish people keeping us here. So I got put off by charity, in and out of the prison system. Every time I went into prison, I learned something new. I was 16 when I was in a boys' prison. I'd stolen a car, smashed it up at 120 miles an hour, and came out of it a bit like Superman, you know. It was a sports car. And when I was in prison, they taught me how to read and write. They taught me about printing. They taught me about all sorts of skills. So the prison system used to be like that. It used to be a system where somebody would go in bad and come out better. And then what happened? Towards the end of the 60s, they changed the system and they made it more of a kind of psychological place. So you went in bad, and a lot of people told you you were a victim. Oh, you're a victim? Oh, I mean, your mum and dad must have been very horrible to you, and all that. And these psychologists turned a very, very simple system where it was the place where the underclass or the working classes could go in and they could learn some skills and then get out. I'm always meeting friends of mine who I went burgling with and stealing cars. And they've got good jobs. And they're bringing up children. And what we've got is this kind of weird situation where in America and in Britain, I don't know if it's over here, we have prison systems where people go in bad and come out worse. So you've got this really weird situation where one of the most wonderful pieces of invention, a prison, in my opinion, full of entrepreneurs. Think of that. I've got a friend of mine, a few years younger than me. He got 35 years for bringing the largest amount of cocaine into Britain. This friend of mine who I grew up with couldn't read or write. He was dyslexic as well. Well, I don't know what that is, but he was one of them. And he was carrying thousands of names around in his head. Why was he doing this? Because there was no opening for him in society. He couldn't have gone to the college. He couldn't have gone to the university. He couldn't have taken an exam. He was an entrepreneur, a natural entrepreneur. So what did he do? He resorted to crime. Instead of being a silly person like me, who always got caught in the middle of the night in somebody else's shop and could never explain my presence, or in somebody else's car, I was a dumb guy. But this guy could have run a vast part of British industry. But they weren't tapping in to the natural entrepreneurism of the system that he worked in. Anyway, I'm going to skip forward because we haven't got much time. You didn't allow me much time. I'm sorry about this. I blame Herr Vogel. I'm Herr Vogel. I don't know if I won't tell you that one. That's terrible. No. I'll leave that one to another time, to the bar. I am an entrepreneur. I have started some wonderful businesses. There's a business I started called Social Brokers. And this Social Brokers is a very, very interesting business because it's like a bank. You go to them and they lend you money. And I've managed to get about 11, 12, 13 million pounds out of institutions, out of individuals. And what I've done, well, the company that I started, invests in businesses that have a social echo. So there's a guy in England called Jamie Oliver, who's a very famous cook. I don't know if he's famous over here. But he's an enormously well-known guy, and he starts a restaurant where he employs people who are long-term unemployed, and he brings them in, and he trains them up as top chefs, in spite of the fact they've got an appalling work record, and then he puts them out in other businesses. And we invested £300,000 in his second restaurant. Within 6 months, we'd got our money back and we'd lent it to somebody else. We've invested in a business that takes people who have come fresh out of prison, and we've got them working in a green industry. They go in and they put lining in the roofs of old age pensioners' houses. They put up solar panels, and they do all sorts of things like that. Very interesting. And we do this, we put the money in, we back the business, because every one of those businesses has a social echo. I'm probably going to have to conclude now, but to me, the reason I disagree with this, as you've said, as you've understood, is that we can't separate entrepreneurism from everything we do in life. Everything. We have to learn to be everyday entrepreneurs. We have to learn to be the kind of people who may not have those jobs in the future which go on forever. Even jobs within the academic field, within the charities, within business are changing by the moment. And we have now one of the most enormous financial threats that we have ever seen. In fact, I wrote about it in the big issue, and I got a load of very strange letters from people because I said, we're going back almost to the 5th century when the Roman Empire fell down. I'm that much of a philosopher. What happened in the Roman Empire is that the financial system went, the legal system went, the laws, and we're going through a situation which looks like very, very much that we might be returning to almost a kind of business-like feudalism. A lot of people just up for themselves. And I don't believe we're going to get out of it as easy as people say. When you've got a country like Ireland, where I come from, where they owe 25 times the amount of annual tax that they receive. And down the road in France, it's 10 times. And Italy, another 10. And let's leave the Greeks alone because they're having a hard time. And everybody's after them. We will need entrepreneurism more than ever, but we need it to be a part of the big organizations and the small organizations. We need to be encouraging our young. We need to be encouraging our poor. Mr. Vogel is working with people on long-term unemployment and in poverty, using entrepreneurism to get people out of poverty and to get them to change the trajectory of their lives. That's what I've done. I didn't do a simple thing when I started the big issue. I did a complex thing. I gave the homeless and the poor the chance of being involved in their own redemption and not leaving it to the professionals. Thank you very much.